Hello and welcome to a somewhat dark studio. The reason will become clear in a moment. Today's one is not about sound, it's all about lights. Now, we don't do too many light videos, but this one seemed to pop out and say it needed doing, and maybe what I've experienced some other people can take advantage of. Lots of times we slag off the Chinese for making rotten stuff, but sometimes they make some really, really good stuff. Now, we're talking really about LED lighting, mainly for stages, but you know, the sort of thing. And they've always been really good at making LED washes. They were a bit dim and patchy when they first came out, but they've got steadily better and better and better. And now we can wash a stage with bright coloured light. They can wiggle about, they can change angle, all that sort of stuff. But what about things like what we in the UK would call profiles? Sort of ellipsoids, as the Americans would call them. You know, the sort of lights that project a hard edge circle of light. Well, I suppose the most successful one for years now has been the ETC Source 4. Excellent pieces of kit, quite expensive if you need quite a lot of them, but pretty solid. And at the start of the summer season, I looked into getting some LED versions to replace our elderly ones that were up in the theatre. In actual fact, what we'd got was some sort of Source 4s, but we'd also got, because we kept needing more, were some slightly older strand kit. And quite frankly, the strand stuff was dim, but it also had a few other little problems. Now, if you don't know much about profiles, I better explain. What I mean is, profile type spotlights, the ellipsoidals, can have shutters that you can use to mask off perhaps where the edge of a piece of scenery comes, or maybe if you're shining it on a stage, you can sort of squish it down to cover just the drum riser, that sort of thing. And usually there's 4 of these shutters, and you sort of slice the edge off. Now, the snag with some of the older lights is that, quite frankly, the optics weren't really up to it. Now, whether that's the reflector at the back, whether it's the large lamp, whether it's the glass that's in front, maybe the glass was a little bit less optically perfect than it should have been. But the problem you used to have was coloured fringing. You know, a bit like when you see a prism and you sort of, it breaks it up into the colours of the rainbow. Well, that's what used to happen on the edges. You'd put the shutter in and there'd be like either a yellow or a blue sort of fringe along the edge of that hard line. And when we first started making LED profiles, it was shocking. It was dreadful. I bought one very early on and vowed I wasn't going to buy another one because it was absolute rubbish. But this year I thought, well, I'll give it one more go. And I saw an advert. Now, there's a firm on AliExpress called SHEHDS, and they do some really cheap and awful LED lights like the ones we've perhaps reviewed in the past. But they also do some really, really good ones. And I was hoping that this one that I bought, just to sort of test out really, was going to be, you know, cheap and cheerful, and I could sort of slag it off a bit and say how dreadful it was and don't buy one, and I can't. So I figured that now we've finished the season and it's sitting here in the corner with a pile of other bits and pieces, I'll let you have a look and see, because it does the shuttering extremely well. Now, it's clearly designed front end to look a bit like ETC Source 4s. That's the sort of thing. In the past, this all used to be a plastic sort of moulding, and now this one's made virtually of metal, which also means it's quite heavy. But it's metal, it's solid, sliding lens tube. Now, with the standard optics that you had on ETCs, strands and all the others, essentially the beam angle is fixed, and by moving the lens tube in and out, all that happens is you get either soft, sharp, or then you keep going, it goes back to soft. The alternative are zoom optics, which add in an extra lens, and then you can actually vary the actual beam. But the vast majority of sort of things that you see out and about now are not zooms. You lose light going through the second lens, so it's still quite common to have fixed focal lengths. So the actual beam width is set. This particular one is supposed to be 29 degrees. I've got no reason to argue with that one. But that's pretty normal. So what I've done is reconfigure the studio. Now normally that green screen behind is blasted with soft lights, and I key it out, and I quite like that background I normally use. But for today, green screen's no good whatsoever, because the light that I'm going to show you is RGBW, and it takes up a fair few DMX channels. Basically it's got a channel for dimmer, red, green, blue, and then white. It's got a few special effects and things, and it'll snap through colours if you want it to. So if you wanted to, you could use DMX to actually snap to a colour, or you can mix them, or you can add, if you really want, things like strobing and stuff like that. Now, the only feature that it has got that I absolutely hate, it's got a fan. And in actual fact, inside the manual, there's even a warning that reminds you really ought to clean the fans every now and again. Mainly because we fill venues up with haze fluid, smoke fluid, and it all gets sucked into the lights and gums up the innards. Now, this particular one has also got a little temperature sensor in it, so on the back of the unit it will tell you how hot it is. So it clearly needs to have cooling. The cooling is a variable speed fan, but you don't really have much control over that. I mean, if it needs to cool, it's got to cool, hasn't it? So it is a bit noisy. I wouldn't want to use these in a rig if I was trying to do a recording of classical music, something like that. A recording with more than about 2 or 3 in the rig, and you definitely hear that fan noise. It's not a gentle, quiet background fan. It's a sort of fairly loud roar when the light is hot. And I guess it keeps them cool, so we just have to put up with that feature. And I guess if we're doing rock and roll and loud amplified music, it doesn't matter at all. So what have I got? Well, I've set up a white umbrella behind me. So the lights that are actually on me are the ones that I normally use. I mean, if you're interested, there's a key up here, and then there's a fill up there. It's got a bigger lens. So key and fill, usual stuff. And there's a backlight, which is up here somewhere. So that's what I've got on me. But then I thought the simplest way to do is I'll run it through Magic Q, which is a lighting control that I like. And the PC version does pretty well for this. So what have we got? Well, normal stuff really. Red, green, blue, and then white. Now, if you look at that carefully, the white is completely blown out because this is really, really bright. Certainly, if you shine that in your eyes, you don't really notice any difference. The instructions say it's a 230 watt unit, so I've got no reason to doubt that. Certainly in real terms, if you stare into it, you know, it's not nice. But look at the edges. So where that umbrella is dangling down, if you look at the shadows, they're sharp and there's no fringing at all. And if you stick the shutter in, exactly the same thing will happen. If you want to see that, I'll show you now. Hang on. I've shoved one of the shutters right across to sort of mask out half of it. And there's a tiny bit of fringing. See what you think. I'm not even sure the camera really picks it up. I can see red, yellow, going right through to blue. So there is like a rainbow of colours. But that's not much. That actually is quite decent. And also, it's very even too. So the amount of fringing at the bottom, the amount of fringing at the top is exactly the same. So what we've got now is the white. Now that's the individual white. So if I take that down, stick in the blue and the green and then the red, that's not a bad white. So that's the RGB mixed white. So red, green and blue at full. And of course we can then also, for extra brightness, stick in the white channel too. And that's even off the beam, it's pretty potent. So that's actually really good. I mean, that would be really good for something like a Source 4. That's actually, well, I'm quite impressed. The usual colour mixing stuff is there. So if we take off, we get a pretty decent magenta. If you remember from some of the other videos, magenta is always a bit of a tricky one to actually reproduce. One of the things with video cameras is that they are a bit picky about what they see. So if I vary the amount of blue in it, we can go more pinky or more down. Till we almost... The range of pinks is pretty good, isn't it? And the same thing if we take out the red channel. The range as we go blue is pretty good. Now, the one thing I've noticed is it is actually capable of doing really dim. You know, that sort of steppiness that LEDs sometimes have. Well, this is actually okay. Let me stick up the white channel a bit. Right. That, in actual fact, is... I better video this, hadn't I? So that's off. If we gradually creep the fader in, that's the lowest. And it steps between that and that. Now, if you actually go back to the wide shot, you can't even see that. It's so dim that it doesn't actually pick up at all. And so we can increase. If I put my phone up there and increase that gradually to full. That works okay. The weird thing though is there's a bit of sort of delay when we go down. I mean, things like snaps work exactly as you'd expect. If I go 1, 2, 3, boom, gone, it drops out. But when we actually sort of look at it from the sort of the low end, so if I take it down here, look, it's going down and down and then it drops off. Does it? But that, can you see that? That's almost, the light is on, off. So that's the lowest I can get, which is a step. If I go one more click down, it will disappear. And you couldn't see that. But when I pop it back in, if I can do it properly. Right, if I pop it back in, it's crept in now. It just, all brightness adjustments right down the bottom. I've got a little bit of a delay, but that's much better than being that nasty steppy thing. And also, look, it's quite smooth. You're not seeing stepped fades at all. So if we actually had a fade that we wanted to sort of run down very slowly, you're not going to suddenly have that snap at the end. That's how it's working. It's quite tricky, isn't it? Normally we're doing okay. The colour purity seems okay. This thing appears to be about 5,600. It's not particularly clear in the book. It's got a little manual. The manual tells you all sorts of things that you probably, half the manual is on sort of looking after yourself and the dangers of fire and things like that. Rigging. There's one little mistake I found in the book. In the spec, it goes down. It says 250 watt LED, the flash rate on the strobe, blah 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 blah. Takes 9 channels. The beam angle is listed as 30 degrees, which is pretty similar to 29 that we sort of standardised on almost. Waterproof level says IP20 outdoor. Well, IP20 is not outdoor. IP20 is indoor. I think it's about ingress of things bigger than something like 12 millimeters from memory, 10 or 12 millimeters. Rain doesn't count. Water will get in this unit. It is not waterproof in any shape or form. So it is definitely not outdoor capable. And the manual makes that a little bit airy-fairy. It weighs about 9 kilos, if that helps. But all in all, I'm actually quite impressed with this. I'd have no qualms at using this at all. And if I was looking for 4, 5, 6 to put front of house, maybe on the stage, you know, the sort of thing that I use normally. If it's a band, we'll have one of these on each of the singers, one on the drums, you know, so that with today's liking for backlight, we can actually still see faces. I'd have no worries at all at buying some of these. And at the moment, they're only a couple £100, and that's pretty good for a metal solid unit, especially when the damn things cost so much money to ship nowadays. So in actual fact, the price is really good. £200 for one of these. I'd have no qualms whatsoever. It's got a gobo slot in the top. It's one of the ones where it's actually protected by a little door that sits on the top. It takes a couple of screws to come out, and then you've got access to put a gobo holder in, and you can do stuff with that. But I rather like this. I'm not totally convinced that the gadgets are much use, really. I mean, yeah, okay, you can do strobing. I don't really think that's particularly important, is it? What I will do is now put the studio lights back to where they usually are, and then you can see the difference and how this can actually get over the top of them. Well, that's more like you're used to seeing me. So let's see, can we actually get that to come up in the background? Yeah. So it's still really bright, isn't it? So with all the studio lights on, that has no trouble cutting through. And even the colours work too. So there we go. That actually works well enough. I mean, I suppose realistically, I mean, I wonder if that would, the green in it would key. I've never tried that. Just as a parting shot. I'll just try and see if I can key that. So see if that green is close enough to the green wall to actually work properly. I don't know. If I take it out, then hopefully the keyer will then pop back in the real background. So there we go. That'll give you an idea. So anyway, if you're after something that can project hard edges, something that's RGBW, something that's bright, something that's well made and solid, you can't really go wrong with this. I don't like recommending particular items, but I have to say I'm pretty taken with this, and certainly it's on my shopping list. Anyway, a bit of lights for you. See you on the next video. Look after yourselves. Take care.